This just in, read those green market signs while you still can, even as the S&P hits a record closing high today. And while the Dow has done very, very well, and companies have certainly done very, very well, neither is doing as well as the overall trend would suggest. For one thing, very few are actually participating in this rally. I'm talking about investors. And for another, most of those companies reporting these good earnings, well, they're really not that good. Here to explain, Jared Levy and Bob Wiedemer. Okay, Jared, to you first, what are we seeing really going on here?
Well, here's the thing. So 275 companies in the S&P have reported. Out of those, about 66% have beat their earnings estimates. In other words, at the end of the day, what profit they're making. Only 40% of them have beaten revenue. And in fact, year over year, compared to last year, companies are making about 2% less than they were. And yet the markets are up 15%. So when you look at those internals, like you were saying earlier, the broad scope of companies out there are actually making less money, but yet markets are much more expensive. This is what gives me pause. Look back to June of 2011. Look back to May of last year. It was the same exact multiple. And guess what? It felt good. It felt euphoric. And almost a week or 2 or 3 weeks later, markets were down 10, 15%. That's a concern that I have here.
You know, this missing revenue expectations, a lot of people don't pay attention to that. And what they say, Bob, is that focus on the bigger picture because the bigger picture is good. The revenue slowdown that we're seeing, even in the face of these better than expected earnings, is a brief temporary phenomenon. What do you say?
Well, you've got to be kidding. Let's look at the economy. We're expected to grow 2% this year in the U.S. Europe will probably be negative. It's practically in a recession or depression, whether you're in the north or the southern part of Europe. And we're expecting earnings to grow. The consensus expectations, earnings to grow 20% third and fourth quarter this year on average. How do you do it? Top down from the revenue standpoint, top down from the economic standpoint. I can't possibly see how they're going to do it.
But Bob, we have done it in the past. I'm not dismissing what you're saying because it makes perfect sense. But we have done that and seen that, and companies defying oftentimes lowered expectations. So it's sort of like me in school bracing my parents for straight F's. That if I got a couple of C's and D's, they thought I was Mensa material. But I know expectations and how they're played. But I'm just wondering whether we're missing something bigger here. And to your point, that would seem to be a global slowdown.
I think that's it. The whole economy has been slowing down. China had been pulling us before. In 2010, 2011, let's face it, China was booming. China's not anymore, and I think that's one of the big changes. Plus, Europe, although it was not doing well in 2010, it's not as bad as it is today, where even Germany is really facing negative growth. So that macro picture has changed a lot.
Jared, what about the individual investor? I talk to more young folks in particular, probably like you, Jared, who tell me, Neil, I saw this little, computer glitch based on a false Twitter rumor of a terrorist attack. Right. And I remember the flash crash, and I really haven't seen much gain in my money over the last 10 years. Neither has my dad or grandfather. So I don't trust this market. It takes a long time to build trust.
It does. And I think young people are breaking more into the market these days than they were just 10 years ago. But there is an element of fear. I'll tell you, Neil, I think the biggest hurdle that every investor faces right now is believing in what Wall Street's telling us, believing in what analysts are telling us, and that don't worry about declining revenue. These companies they'll make money after all, and it'll be okay. Believing those reports, and then also having faith that the U.S. government is going to do the right thing, both in terms of regulation, in terms of policy, and it all sort of wraps together. Young people are more informed and more plugged in now than they ever were, as are all investors, and I think that is more of a problem than anything because they see the mess out there. So, yes, confidence, as strong as it may seem right now, and by the way, we've got consumer confidence out tomorrow,
right.
It's not as strong as it should be. And that's going to be another reason why I have a problem seeing these, so-called earnings continuing to rise.
Bob, real quickly then, that would speak of a market that, in a way, might like the flip side of this. The weaker things get, the more the Fed keeps providing the punch to keep this puppy going, right?
Well, I think that's possibly true, but we'll see how much punch we get out of that punch, so to speak. I mean, absolutely, you're right. The Japanese stock market was overpriced at 20,000. It still went to 36,000 before crashing back to 10,000. Markets can go up even if the fundamentals are wrong, but that usually doesn't last for too long.
All right. I want to thank you, Bob. I want to thank you, Jared.